give it a shot. Perfect. There we go.
All right, so we'll get started. So again, welcome to the Introduction to the Student Visa Process webinar, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're excited to share with you our knowledge and experience surrounding the student visa process, and hopefully give you a little more insight and answer any questions that you might have that we can help with as you work with students throughout that process. So this is just an overview of what we plan to discuss. We'll start with some introductions, and then talk about some initial considerations when starting the visa process, things that you'll need to keep in mind when applying, what materials students need to compile, and then also thinking about like fees and timelines, things like that. So first, some introductions for you. I am Shannon Sanctuary. I am one of the AIFS Global Program Managers working with students throughout the pre-departure process. So once they've enrolled in the program, I'm working with them throughout all aspects of things they need to do to prepare for their time abroad. One of those being the visa process. So I've been with AIFS for almost 18 years. And in that time, I've worked with many different program locations and have learned the visa processes for many different countries. But my area expertise is with Italy. And then I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Justin Lee.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for showing up. My name is Justin Lee. I am also one of the global program managers here at AIFS. Started around the same time as Shannon, close to 18 years ago. And like Shannon, I have held and managed many different program locations. So definitely a vast array of at least basic visa knowledge. My area of specialties is Spanish visas. As we go forward here, Shannon and I will share our knowledge and our thoughts about the processes and all of the ins and outs of the joy of applying for a visa.
So I do want to mention that we'll kind of go over like the broad aspects of applying for a visa in general. I'm not going to go into the specifics for each country, but certainly if there's questions that we might be able to answer, or we can try, or at least give you some sort of direction. So just wanted to highlight that. So some initial considerations. As soon as the student decides to study abroad, or that they want to pursue a study abroad application, it is really important that they make sure that they apply for their passport at that time, just because once they're enrolled and moving along in the process, the visa is usually something they need to be thinking about very quickly. So it's important that they have that passport in hand and ready to go. So we'd always like students to be advised to be applying for that passport if they don't already have one, at the same time they make that decision that they want to apply for a study abroad program. And also, as we know, currently passport processing times are very delayed, or it's very expensive to expedite it. So the sooner they can get that moving, the better. For many countries, they do require that a student have a passport that is valid for at least 6 months after the program end date. So each country, has different requirements or date frames that they're working with, but typically 6 months is advised. So if a student has a valid passport, but it's expiring less than 6 months outside of the program end date, you can always check in with that program advisor for the program that they've applied to and see if there's a need for renewing the passport, or if that might suffice for that particular country. But a good frame of reference is that 6 months. Again, just if it's late in the game, always consider getting an expedited passport. where possible, just so again, so they have that passport ready to go to start the visa application process. It's also important to understand that sometimes the passport scan or passport number is necessary in order for us to issue visa materials. So them waiting for a passport not only delays them in applying for the visa, but getting the materials that they need to then apply for the visa. Non-US citizens, it's important for them to consider that they may have a different visa process than a US citizen for the country that they're traveling to. So, sometimes we have some experience and can advise, but in most cases, it's very important. In all cases, it's important for that student to reach out to the consulate of the country they're applying to and find out what their specific requirements are, as they may differ from the way we're advising US citizens. And who needs a visa? That question is answered by various different things. So it all depends on the country that a student is studying in, the length of that program, and it could even be determined by what they're doing, where if they're interning, they may need a visa, but if they're studying, they don't. So we, as AIFS program managers and advisors, will provide students with the information they need and what visa they do or do not require. But those are all things that could factor in. It may be because if it's over 90 days, if it's under, can determine whether a visa is needed. Some countries require them from US citizens, others don't. So all of that can factor in. How to apply for a visa. There's different ways. Again, every country is different. So there's things that you will just need to be aware of or advise a student to look into. Applications may need to be submitted by or in person. Typically, that would be at a consulate or honorary consulate or visa processing services such as VFS. So there's different places, and the student needs to be aware of where they're actually going and if an appointment is required that they would need to schedule in advance. So other consulates accept applications by mail, where a student would gather all the materials and just send it off, sometimes requiring separate documentation like notarizations before doing so. And then other countries might have an online visa system that's kind of standard for like New Zealand and Australia, for instance. So it's very important for the student to read through all their materials to understand what type of submission is possible and what if that requires anything for them to do in advance, such as scheduling an appointment, because appointments do fill up very quickly. The jurisdiction. So when it comes to applying with a consulate, you want to pay attention to jurisdiction. Sometimes consulates will allow students to apply if they fall under their jurisdiction based on their school address. Sometimes they're looking for only individuals that fall under their jurisdiction based on their home address, and that would be the address that's on their state ID, so driver's license. So they would need to have that ID available to show and prove their jurisdictions. So again, it's important to understand what the consulate requires if they accept either, if they accept only one of those qualifiers for their jurisdiction. And the other thing to do that you need when you're applying for a visa is to just read through all the guidance that is provided. So AIFS will provide students that need to get student visas with guidance in various manners. So we post everything in their student portal. Oftentimes an email will go out as well with different details. And then if any letters are needed from AIFS, which in most cases will be true, they will get those either emailed or mailed. So it's very important for students to be paying close attention to everything that they're receiving from us via mail, via email, in their portal. And then another thing to consider is whether expediting services are possible for the visa. Some countries have those options available, others do not. So it's really important for a student to understand if they are applying late, especially if that's an option, or if it's not an option, that they need to be very mindful of the deadlines and the processing times that they're advised of. So AIFS does offer what we call batch visa processing services. We offer these for Italy and for Spain. And what that means is that we can apply on the student's behalf at the respective consulate. So students prepare all of their materials, send them in to us, and then we are able to submit them. So what it does is it saves the student from having to go in person to the consulate. So, saves them on the travel and the fun of finding an available appointment and all of that. So for Italy, we are only able to offer the batch processing for students that fall under the Boston, New York, and San Francisco consulates currently. It can be based on their home, again, driver's license, or their school address. So if a student falls under the jurisdiction of either of those consulates based on either address, we can take them, which is really helpful. It does help us get a lot of students able to use that service. Anyone that falls under the jurisdiction of another Italian consulate would need to apply on their own, and they'll be advised, again, very clearly on how to do that, and whether or not they have to go in person or are allowed to apply by mail. Again, each consulate has their own say in that matter. Unfortunately, it's not straight across the board. So yes, so any of those students, we do have specific deadlines in order to qualify for the batch processing. So anyone that we see that falls under either or any of those three consulates, we provide an outline of everything they need to send us, as well as deadlines. So I need to have those visa applications in my hand on May 15th if they're going abroad for the fall, or October 15th if they're studying in the spring. And that gives us plenty of time to review everything, time for them to resubmit anything that required corrections prior to the time that I have to submit everything to the consulate, which is usually very early November. For the Italy visa batch processing, we don't currently charge a service fee. So the only fee that the students need to consider is just the visa fee, which they would be paying whether they're applying on their own or with us. So that is the way it is right now. We are hoping to look into being able to expand this service to other consulates. So stay tuned, but right now, again, it's just Boston, New York, and San Francisco. And now I'm going to pass it along to Justin, and he'll go over the Spain batch visa processing.
Great, thank you so much, Shannon. Yes, so we also do offer the batch visa processing for Spain, and we do highly recommend that that students take advantage of the batch visas. We can batch visas at all consulates in the continental US, except for Puerto Rico. And the consulate there for Spain is based on either the driver's license, the state of the driver's license, or the school address. It very much depends on the consulate in terms of what their requirement is. For Spain, because we do all of the consulates, it's very deadline focused. Deadlines are early, so that I can make sure that we have all of the documents needed, etc., for the appointment at the student-specific consulate, so we can apply as a group there. I do ask that for fall and full year students, all applicants start their AIFS application by April 15th and September 5th for spring. You can see that is very early, but it is definitely needed. And then from May 1 for fall full year, September 10th for spring, they need to complete their application and have their passport copy and enroll in the program by then. And then all visa documents are due to the AIFS office by May 15th for fall and full year, and September 27th for spring applications. These are very strict deadlines, and I really cannot extend or make exceptions. So it's really important that students pay attention to that. We do advise them early on in the application process of these deadlines, but it is very important as well that they get reminders of these deadlines. Currently, we do charge a $75 service fee on top of the Spanish consulate visa fee, which is currently $160. It hasn't changed in years, but you never know when it could. So right now it's we bill students when they submit their applications to us for $235, and then we take care of the payment to the consulate when we apply as a batch. All right, next is what to compile. Again, this is very program and even consulate specific. I should say country and consulate specific. So for example, the 9 different consulates of Spain, they all have core requirements, but they can also all request and have different additional requirements as well, whether it be an enrollment letter from the school or how to apply, etc. It can be very, very down to the consulate, the specific consulate. So it's very important that students carefully read the guide that we provide, as well as reference the websites that we provide as well, and then use their AIFS program manager or advisor for assistance in any questions that they may have. There is specific checklists for what they need to compile within the guides, and the time frame in terms of when they need to apply, etc. We do provide some supportive letters that are core requirements for each different location. That covers in different aspects. For example, Spain, we provide a financial guarantee letter, as well as, and that's unique to Spain, but that covers the financial aspects of it. I know that Italy and other locations have other financial requirements as well, but they do not allow AIFS to provide that documentation. So it's very important, especially when it comes to financials, that students pay very close attention to what the requirements are, as many locations do require a certain amount of money in an account over a certain number of months. So it's important that students know that early on, so they can they can kind of plan ahead to make sure their financial statements will work out for their visa. We also provide a insurance confirmation letter through CISI, Cultural Insurance Services International. Most consulates in most countries throughout the world will require a confirmation of medical insurance, so that letter covers that. And then also the acceptance letter from the university abroad is also required. So those are typically the 2 to 3 core documents that we provide students with to accompany their visa applications. Of course, if they are applying through the Italy or Spain batch visa process, we'll take care of the letters on our end here. So they don't need to worry about providing anything for those items when they send in their documentation to us. Very much dependent on the consulate and the country, but there are some documents that students may need from their U.S. schools, from you. Indicating sometimes disciplinary clearances or confirmation of enrollment and credits that will transfer back to you. So again, that will be specified in the specific country's visa guide that we provide to your students. Great. So things to consider. Passports and renewals are a very big thing that students really need to consider. As Shannon mentioned before, even if they are considering studying abroad, they really need to get a passport right away if they do not have one. Right now, processing times vary, but right now, the U.S. State Department processing time is 3 to 5 weeks for expedited visas, and 7 to 10 weeks for regular processing. Of course, there are also urgent expedited visas, but those are typically reserved for students that are traveling within 14 days or people traveling within 14 days. So that typically will not work for our students. There are some specific requirements as well that some of the consulates will need. Some items will need to be notarized. Some consulates and locations may require FBI background checks. And those can be fairly easily and quickly done through the FBI's website or an identity processor, which is called a third-party channeler. So that's always going to be in the guides of the specific country if they need that. There can also be variations of requirements between a single semester visa and a full year visa. For example, my Spain visas for full years, they are required to provide an FBI background check, but then that also needs to be sent to the U.S. State Department for an apostille, which is essentially an international notary. And then it needs to be translated before the process. So you can see that adds on several weeks in a normal circumstance, right? For them to compile all the visa documents that they will need for a full year visa. Right now, anything that needs an apostille or apostille is going to be very tricky. The authentications office at the U.S. Department of State is delayed by 12 weeks. And there is no way to expedite those apostille seals and signatures. So that can be tricky. Definitely, your students will need to rely upon their AIFS program manager or advisor to help them guide them through that process, and get the information in terms of timing, etc., down for anything that might need the apostille. Some countries require biometrics, being a photo or fingerprints, for the visa application. And again, that will be specified in the specific country's guide in terms of not only if it's needed, but also how it should be accomplished. Students do need to consider as well the cost of traveling, especially if they're not doing the Italy or Spain visa service. But for all other countries and those students that are applying on their own, especially in-person consulate appointments, they might need to travel quite a distance in order to apply for their visa in person. So they need to take into account the cost of travel, flights, trains, cars, possibly an overnight stay to obtain, to apply for their visa. And then also, if it's required that they pick it up in person, they will also have to do that again to return to the consulate to pick it up. So costs can be definitely more than what we specify in our guides, because of travel and the cost of different elements of getting the visa, as well as shipping. If it's a mail-in consulate, the cost of overnighting it via courier, well, much less expensive than traveling in person. That's an extra cost as well to obtain the visa. And I'm sure you all know, but the consulate requirements and the country requirements can be ever changing. So it's really important that students start early. We here at AIFS make sure to constantly monitor any changes. However, the changes might not be widely known for a bit. So we do our best to try to keep up on any consulate changes and country changes to visas, and advise students as soon as we know after interpreting what those changes are. As consulate information can be quite difficult to understand, so we do our best to interpret that for students to make it clear and concise in terms of what the changes are and what they need to be, what they need to do. Also, definitely the batch process for Italy or Spain versus applying independently can require different documents. So a batch process might require fewer documents than applying independently. So it's important for students to consider that when they are relying upon the guides and deciding whether or not for Italy or Spain to do the visa batch process with us. Great. Thanks, Shannon. So yeah, again, every country, every consulate even within that country can have different visa fees. Someplace like Spain can be set in US dollars, and other places can say it is whatever the exchange rate is for 80 euros at that time. So it can be a little difficult to navigate at times. Again, that's a great place to utilize our knowledge here at AIFS to help clarify, what the visa fee is. In addition to the visa fees, every country and even consulate can request or can have different ways of making that payment, whether it be cash only or credit card, debit card, or money order, and even specific money orders from the U.S. Postal Service. So it's important that students really take care to understand how that payment is to be made for their appointment. Processing times vary immensely, per not only per country, but also per consulate. And some are fairly standard, 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and others can vary, anywhere from 2 weeks on up to 8, 9 weeks from the same consulate or same country. So timing is extremely critical when it comes to applying for visas. And also when it comes to making appointments. If a student needs to apply in person, they will need to make sure they have sufficient time to schedule that appointment, and appointments can often book up well in advance. So they need to make sure that they start early and have their passport, and start educating themselves, even if it's very early, start educating themselves about the process of applying for a visa. And of course, we're here to guide them as well. And, depending on the country or location, the program manager or advisor can hold specific kind of visa webinars so that students can understand better and ask their questions in a group environment with the appropriate AIFS staff member. How the passport and visa, which is affixed into the passport, is returned also varies greatly. And some consulates and locations will allow a mailing back to the student. Others require an in-person pickup. So again, our guides will provide that information in terms of how a student will be able to get their passport and visa back to them once the consulate has issued the visa. Let's see here. Yeah, so also depending on the country and consulate, some students may be required to submit a self-addressed stamped return courier envelope for the return of their passport. So that's an additional expense, but again, cheaper than going in person. And sometimes they'll just charge an extra fee for returning it via mail. And again, sometimes they'll require you, they'll let the student know when it's ready, and then the student's responsible for returning back to the consulate to pick up their passport and visa. Passports are pasted into a blank page of the student's passport. Excuse me, visas are affixed and pasted into a blank page of the student's passport. And sometimes, depending on the location, it can be an e-visa, electronic visas that is just associated with their passport number and is all digital. Okay, great.
I just wanted to kind of address some of the questions. I know everyone can see them, but I just thought it might be helpful to chat about them for everyone to hear. So there's a lot of questions about processing times. So again, those very much depend on the specific consulate or visa processing center, and they may not even have it, it could change at any time. There's rarely a guaranteed processing time. we can give students an estimate based on experience with the consulates, but turnaround time is never a guaranteed. So students should expect that they are leaving their passport. If they're applying in person or by mail, they're leaving that passport with the consulate and should not expect to have it returned by any specific date. And, should keep that in mind with their planned travels, personal, or if they're going to leave early. That should all be taken into consideration, that there is no guarantee that that passport will be in their hand by any specific date. So again, lots of things factor in. Some consulates have like standard, like Justin said, it might be like typically it's 2 weeks. Other consulates, typically it's 6 weeks. But that could change tomorrow and then the next day. And then like busy times of year, holidays, like if students start applying in mid to late December, December and January are very busy times for the consulate, because that's when everybody decides to get their applications in. They've waited, till the end. And then there's holidays, there's just lots of things that factor into less, business days for processing. August is also a very busy month. So when a consulate might typically be processing visas in 3 weeks in June, if a student then waits to apply in August, it's now taking 4 to 5 weeks. So all the things, always earlier, better. One thing that we didn't mention also that I think is valid to say is that there's sometimes also date frames within when you can apply. So a student can't necessarily apply super early. They have to wait until they're within like 90 days or 180 days of their program start. So all of this is shared with students in the guidance that we provide. We give, estimated processing times. We give timelines of when they should start applying or can start applying. So just want to share that. Like, it's always, I'm sure the students are reading through. I know it's a lot of information we give. Sometimes it helps them to have a second set of eyes to read through that and help clarify, and point those important facts out for them. And one last thing about processing times I want to say, at least for Italy, Justin can chime in if it's different for Spain, but just because we're doing batch processing, that doesn't mean things are processed faster. So in fact, sometimes I find that they might, hold off on those. So they're always paying attention to departure dates. I've never, knock on wood, had anything not returned in time, but there's definitely, like for spring, some mid-January returns to me. So their students are getting it like 2 weeks before they're going. So it's always, I set those expectations with students. I let them know, but it's always helpful, if their advisors are aware of that as well, and just, let them know not to worry. I'm in touch with the consulate. I'm following up on it. I know they have it, and we need to get it back. So, but just because you're doing batch processing doesn't mean you're getting your passport back in 2 weeks or anything.
Exactly. Yeah, Shannon, I'll chime in here too, if you don't mind, and answer some of the questions about Spain. So I do advise Spain students to not plan any international travel from basically for spring, from October through the start of their program. And then for fall, it's typically May through the start of the program. Late August, September. So we do definitely, for batch processing, as soon as we get them back from the consulates, we will, we return them to the students right away. So we don't hold them. As Shannon mentioned, it's not likely at all that a student will go into a consulate and get their visa at that very moment. There's always a processing time. For Spain, for example, a visa can take 2 weeks. It can take 9 weeks. And it's just completely random and basically just completely depends on when the authorities in Madrid, which is the location that actually issues the visa approval, process that. So it's very hard to predict for Spain and a lot of other countries as well. There's a question about visa processors. As Shannon mentioned, it's very dependent on the location and the country. Spain does not work with any type of visa expeditors either. And there are some places that do work with visa processors. So if that is an option, students can definitely consider it. There's typically a premium to work with and a passport, or excuse me, a visa expediter. But it's certainly something to consider if needed.
Another question came up about getting copies of our visa guides. What I would say to that is more than happy to share those. I'm not sure that we would want to send them out just to have them out, only because they could change, and I just wouldn't want them to be on file somewhere as a guide. But if you're working with a specific student and they have questions, more than happy to share with you the guide that the student has received so that you can read through it and help them with any questions that they have, or reach out to us with any questions. So again, happy to share them, but I just want to make sure that they're not being put on file for advising purposes in case there are changes, because changes happen one semester to the next. So
I agree. And even like mid visa processing, changes can happen. So it's definitely a living document. I can share for Spain information on the deadlines and timelines for the batch process. So happy to do that here.
okay. And Angela mentioned that she is able to see what we've posted to this for the students through the advisor portal. So
that's
good
great
to know. I didn't actually necessarily know that. So that will be, again, that will help you in advising students on their specific programs for those terms. So yes, glad they're posted there. And again, if you're working with a specific student, feel free to reach out to whoever their program manager is to see what guidance they've been given.
Yes. So yes, Lisa, thanks for posting the visa pages at NAFSA. That is definitely a good resource that we use here as well when we have some questions. And see, just looking at a chat from Carrie. You do batch processing for students, Spain and Italy. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, again, we for Spain, I provide that financial guarantee letter from AIFS, and that works. But yeah, I don't know. Sounds like it works for Italy as well.
No, for Italy, students do need to provide proof of funds. So, which is typically in the form of a bank statement or letter. But several consulates will accept proof of scholarships. Some will even take bank statements or letters from parents. So, but others will not. So it varies. But oftentimes they do say that if you can provide proof of scholarship or financial aid documentation, they will consider that. I think they'll want to see disbursement dates, and that needs to be clear that they would have access to that money before they're there.
Yes, Angela, I just saw your message about the Spanish consulate changes as you're taking years off of your Spain advisor's life. Absolutely. I didn't look like this last year. Yes, it's something we are monitoring extremely closely. And yeah, as soon as I have clarification on a number of items, I'll be updating our guides and getting those ready for our fall students.
Any other questions we could help with? Happy to do our best to give as much advice as possible.
Lisa, I think the guides in the portal, in the advisor portal, there should be a documents section somewhere there, or kind of a student resources section. I forgot exactly how it's worded on the advisor portal, and it should be there. And honestly, it does depend on how we post the guides, whether or not advisors can see them. So they might not all be there, but it's a great thought to make sure that we all post those guides every semester and year so that you can see them as well.
Yes. So if you have an international student, the best suggestion would be for them to reach out to the consulate of the country that they would be traveling to, and find out what is required for them based on the passport that they hold. Would they follow the typical student visa process? Do they need a visa at all? Do they have additional steps that they have to take? So the consulate for the country that they would travel to is the best resource.
Yes. Thanks very much, Melissa, for posting that information there.
Consulates are extremely hard to get in touch with. Unfortunately, that is not their priority of responding to phone calls and emails. All I can say is that you have to be polite and persistent. And just, it depends. Read their website fully for everything. Reach out to us. If they feel that the answer to your question is on their website, they will not reply. And they are typically very understaffed and overloaded. So their priority is to process the applications in front of them rather than to reply to questions. So it is frustrating, difficult. I understand. I feel have the same experience. And all I can say is, yeah, just be persistent. And then when you do get somebody, be as polite as possible.
Totally agree. Yeah, even we don't have necessarily any easy way or way to contact consulates that's guaranteed. But as Shannon mentioned, they're not ignoring, they are just trying to process visas, and that is their first priority. So they're not trying to be rude or mean or ignore anything. They just want to make sure that those visas are processed. And yes, niceness does go a very long way with consulate communication.
Yeah. Okay, there's a question about the student going to 2 different countries. So we definitely have had experience with that, where a student wants to do like a fall semester one place and spring semester the next. And there, depending on the visa processes, sometimes we do need to suggest that it's not possible, or it usually we try to find another option. Sometimes it's just a matter of like switching the order because maybe you don't need a visa for the second location. So that makes it easier because another thing that is true that we haven't really covered is that most consulates require that a student apply from the US. So you can't necessarily extend a visa or you can't apply once you're abroad. So it wouldn't be something that you can apply for a visa for the spring while you're studying in the fall because you're not going to send your passport somewhere when you're traveling. So um, those are all things to think about. So it really depends. It's definitely possible if the student has flexibility in what their plans would be, flexibility on where they would go, flexibility of whether they can come back to the US between the 2 semesters. So it really, the specifics we'd need to know, but it's possible. They just need to understand the logistics that would go into it. And timeframes of when you can apply also impact that. If a country allows a student to apply for a visa 6 months in advance, maybe that they can apply for their fall and spring visa both before the fall program. If they can
Yeah.
only apply within 90 days, then they can't do that.
Right. Another suggestion, depending on the countries again, is that students can obtain a second passport. And it's not a very well known thing, but there it is definitely possible to obtain a second passport, which is a limited duration passport, usually good for 2 to 3 years, um, uh, alongside their normal passport. So it's designed for cases like this, where somebody is traveling, but they need to obtain a visa at the same time. So there are stipulations that can be denied for a second passport, but that is an option as well. One thing I would say is uh, go through a passport expediter that can do second passports, because they can advise the students better in terms of what the requirements are for the second passport. The timing, I can tell you for sure that it does come at a premium, but I've suggested that to many students over the years, and they've successfully received that second passport and have been able to go abroad to both of their locations without an issue. Kathleen, so there really is no, basically the rule for the Schengen area is US citizens can stay up to 90 days within a 6-month period of time. So once they use up their 90 days, they have to wait 6 months before they re-enter. So that is not a way around obtaining a visa for programs that are over 90 days within the Schengen area. Yes. The other thing is, if they leave the Schengen area during the program, that is deducted from the amount of time they are in the Schengen area. So, for example, if they student decides to go to Ireland or the UK for spring break, that will take off 7 days from the time they are in the Schengen area. So we look at all those little tips and everything, when there are issues with a student obtaining a required visa, to see how within the Schengen area, to see how and if we can possibly suggest ways to reduce their stays to 90 days, so they won't need to obtain a visa.
Any other questions? We're reaching the 1 hour mark, but happy to stay on another few minutes if you do have additional questions. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that it was helpful. And our program advising team is always here to answer any questions. So students should always feel comfortable and be and know that we're a resource for them. But same goes for you and your offices. So if you're working with a student, and honestly, even if you're working with a student going on a different program, and you know that we might have the resource or the experience, happy to chat and share our knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks everybody for showing up. We hope you found this useful.
Yeah. Have a great afternoon.
All right.